Thank you. I appreciate my colleague, Mr. Grothman, on that and sticking up for families and for in other conversations on sensible border policy that's going to keep our country safe and strong, and our employees of this country more likely to be employed. So it's appreciated. Thank you, sir. Mr. Speaker, I ask unanimous consent that all members may have 5 legislative days in which to revise and extend their remarks and include extraneous material on the topic of this special order.
Without objection, that is granted.
All right, and picking up a little bit on what Mr. Grossman was saying here a moment ago, I'd like to point out as well, I think just a real national heroine, who's a young woman who's really stepped up out of necessity, but also out of a strong desire to do the right thing and have the right thing. And I'm talking about Riley Gaines, a collegiate swimmer who had swam so successfully, did much winning at the University of Kentucky. She's the one that also faced in competition, had to face off against basically a 6'4" male, and was denied opportunities, denied recognition because of the unfairness and imbalance of girls and women in their sports having to face boys and men in their sports, as well as all the discomfort from shared changing areas and the unfairness of losing out on the ability to win competitions where that might put them in a position to win medals that might ultimately win them a scholarship from high school into college, or put them in a national competition or an international competition if you're at the collegiate level or at the Olympic level. And we saw some horrific things, in my view, in this last Olympics, where the young woman who was in female boxing there, I believe she was from Italy, how humiliated she was. She had to face basically a male boxer with a clear physical advantage and just get the heck beat out of her in the process. And one of the saddest things I've seen in a long time was her collapsing on her knees, just in tears, at that Olympic event afterwards because of the unfairness of it all and how hard she trained for years and years and years to be in that position, only to have, in this case, the Olympic Committee say, we'll let anybody in competing against the women in this case. So, but Riley Gaines, I know her personally and just find her to be a dynamic young woman who stand up for the right things. She didn't ask for this position. She was a competitor and doing her thing. She was thrust into this position because she saw what was needed to be done, what needed to be made right on this, and sticking up for other women and girls in their sports and in their other domains. And so she's gotten a lot of good work done, including today the presidential declaration that this would no longer go on in things that in this country, especially things that the federal government might have involvement or sanction in. So congratulations to her, and appreciation to President Trump for straightening things back out a little bit, putting some common sense back into that area. So with that, I hear the debate here tonight on federal workers and the opportunity that has been put in place here for if they seek and so choose, and here's the word, choice, to take advantage of an opportunity if the job they're in is not meeting where they want to be, or you might see reduction in some of these government programs and some of these government agencies. It's a pretty generous exit of 8 months of pay and such to retire from that job or move on that one and go seek other opportunities. We hear a lot of caterwauling about that tonight, about, I guess, the essentialness of every single government agency and every single worker. Now, there's plenty of really good workers willing to work hard and do a good job in so many of our federal agencies, but there's also quite a few that aren't as motivated. And we see this battle over them returning to work as is being mandated. We saw President Biden, just before leaving office, trying to give out super generous contracts and extend the term of not having to be at the workplace, based still upon basically the COVID era and getting used to that concept and way of doing things, It's proper for people to show up to work. It's essential. Around here, we had proxy voting, and our committees were, not meeting in person. And doggone it, it's essential in this place that we sit across from each other, that we sit next to each other, and have these real debates in front of the American public to allow true debate, true public debate on the things that are going to affect, over 300 million Americans on the decisions made here. So I'm certainly glad we got rid of proxy voting here and got back to work doing things after the COVID era finally ended, and a lot of manipulation that happened in that era to make things, still we haven't completely recovered in our workforce and the attitudes, I think, of certain people that feel like they're entitled to just having the government send them checks, and the attitude of not having to show up to work. We've found that certain people can do a certain amount of work from home, but the battle here in town, where some really high percentage, I've heard his number as high as 92, I don't know if it's accurate or not, 92% aren't showing up here. Some of these buildings are almost ghost towns from the workforce not coming in there. So yeah, this needs to be looked at. So what is being looked at by the Department of Government Efficiency, DOGE, they're calling it, and Elon Musk, is basically saying, hey, American taxpayers, we know you work hard for what you earn and what government takes from you. These aren't contributions, as we hear talk, these contributions, they aren't contributions, they're compelled payments of taxes here. You don't have a choice, or they come start taking things away from you and auctioning off your home or your car or your farm or whatever if you don't pay your taxes. It's not voluntary. It's not contributions, as these guys talk about. It's not investments. They take it from you. So I think any taxpayer, any working person has the right to demand that government is looking at things and is it being efficient with what it's using. And the stones they're flipping over and what they're uncovering so far with USAID and many other aspects I can't list here tonight are showing that it confirms what I think normal people know. There's a lot of money being wasted in government by many entities, And look at the situation with Ukraine. Now Zelensky is claiming of about $177 billion that's been transferred over there, he thinks only 75 billion of it actually got to him or the causes they were working on over there in Ukraine. So where's $102 billion gone? Are these real numbers? Let's investigate. Let's find out. And that's what we need to do respectfully with tax dollars that are taken from people, not voluntarily. And so every aspect of government needs to have that accountability. It's okay to audit. It's okay to ask these questions. It's not against something or against a certain group of people. So when we're talking about, in this case, the opportunity for employees to find other opportunities, then what would be wrong with that if they so choose? And if agencies are going to be downsized, and everybody's mad at Elon Musk now, at least on that side of the aisle. Well, when he took over Twitter, now known as X, he cleared out about 85% of the employees there, that a lot of them are just hanging on and going for the party there. He seems to be able to run that entity a lot more efficiently. So that should be an example for government, instead of this scourge that we're hearing about, is that, oh, it's awful, it's terrible. But we appreciate those to do the things that we as Americans ask the government agencies to do, and they do them efficiently and with cheerfulness, and remembering that the customers are the taxpayers, the people that come to the counter and say, hey, I need a permit to do this, or I need this or that service. These are the customers, Getting a passport. We've had horrific stories come in out of my own office about during the height of COVID and such, that you could hardly get anybody to process a passport for you, at least very timely. In my home state of California, just a simple thing like a personalized license plate at the state level from DMV, it takes 9 months now. 9 months to get a personalized plate. Wow. That's a revenue generator for the state, supposedly. So, we've got to really check and see what are the attitudes of people that work and serve in government at any level, whether you're elected, whether you're hired, or, an agency head, what have you. And these are good conversations to have, not the caterwauling we're hearing about oh my gosh, it might be displacing somebody. Like, well, maybe we need to have a little downsizing. I believe we do. So anyway, that's that piece on that debate. But I'm going to return back to issues going on in the West. I privileged to chair the Western Caucus in the House here, and the important issues that it has addressed over the years, and a lot of that revolves around energy. And I'll tell you what, the issue with energy in this country, when we've seen the skyrocketing prices of all types of fuel, that has been a major inflation driver. Really, two aspects of why we're suffering from inflation is government overspending beyond anywhere close to what revenue it was. The new trillions we have seen as a government being spent during the COVID era and beyond, and the end of the Biden administration. Well, we're going to have to take some medicine on that and get back to, how about a concept of pre-COVID level of spending, maybe even adjusted for inflation. Old inflation, not this massive inflation. We have the right and the obligation to be looking at it this way. So inflation driven by massive government spending, eating up the pool of available currency and credit, as well as the cost of doing business driven by issues such as energy. You know, in farming, for example, on my own farm, a couple years ago, we saw that our price of fertilizer tripled and our price of fuel doubled in that season. So what does that mean for a farmer like me or any other farmer growing a crop? Well, they still have to be in the black at the end of the year. They still have to make a profit. And so those costs are going to be passed on somewhere, aren't they? And so that's going to always comes back to the consumer. It always comes back to the taxpayer having to pay for these things. Because on one hand, government massive overspending here at the federal level, and things that drive inflation, such as the cost of fuel, and all the things that are related. There is so much that depends on energy and any type of production that is going to have an impact on price. You know, so take diesel fuel. You know, we'll take a food product. As a farmer, when you start out in the spring, you need fuel to start tilling the land and getting it ready for preparing a seed bed to plant that crop. So someone has to bring you the diesel to run your equipment. Then soon after, someone delivers that fertilizer, likely with a diesel vehicle. Someone delivers that seed. And at that point, you've planted, and then you have irrigation of one type or another, depending on your crop. Well, in some cases, it's going to be fuel that's required to run the pumps, or electricity to run wells, fuel for lift pumps. In some cases, you're fortunate you have gravity-fed water, like much of we do in Northern California, due to storage of water. So what is our energy policy? Well, I guarantee you under President Trump, it's going to improve. And with that, we're going to see improved prices on energy. And that will help us to tame inflation. And on the other side of the coin here, with the work of Elon Musk and others on the Department of Government Efficiency, prices can go down if we're not doing so much massive spending and sucking up all the credit and all the currency out there by government action. That's a pretty good recipe. Why don't we allow success to happen on that? Because American people are clamoring for it. As they've had their eyes open on what's been going on, where their tax dollars are going, I'd say to my colleagues on the other side of the aisle, you might just slow down a little bit and look and see what's really happening here, and how people are feeling about that, how they're thinking about it, how they felt it for several years in their wallets with inflation, and wondering why is it I no longer have any money left over to do some of the things I want. At the same time where there's these mandates coming down the pike in my home state of California and affecting things even nationally here, like, well, you can't buy a gas-powered vehicle anymore, or diesel-powered pickup in just a few years because we want to ban them because of CO2. Well, that's taking away choices from people. And it's giving them unaffordable alternatives, especially the more they ban and the more they drive up the cost of fuel. In my own home state, they keep adding on new taxes for climate taxes or CO2 taxes, or they have auctions for the privilege of making CO2. Where did that come from? That's like they devised a new currency CO2, you know? I mean, so I can remind you, you've probably seen me on TV doing this several times, but let me remind you, the composition of our atmosphere is those main components. Right there in yellow, that's nitrogen, 78%. Now I ask people, how much CO2 do you think there is in the atmosphere? Most folks, you know, going about their lives, not worried about all this stuff, they say they'll guess somewhere between 20 and 50%. Well, nitrogen is at 78. Here in the blue is oxygen at 21. That adds up to 99. Third place, here in the green, argon, 0.93%. So we're already at 99.93% that is not CO2. So look over here, here's some other trace gases that has to do with, you know, water vapor, and there's even krypton gas up in the atmosphere. That's 0.03. So you come down here to this little purple stripe right here. CO2 is 0.04%. 0.04%. It's practically a rounding error when you look at it on this chart, okay? And you would think it's an existential crisis the way, you know, John Kerry and all the others are taking their private jets over to Davos and talking about how we need to change our life, and that the people with the Paris Accord and the World Economic Fund or others all want to make sure the United States is paying a heavy price for this. Meanwhile, China builds more and more coal-fired power plants and does what they wish. They're not part of that Paris Accord. So, you know, again, a little reminder on CO2 and what that is actually going to be costing us. So let's get back to other forms of energy here. I'm showing you a picture of Shasta Dam. Now, it's actually starting to fill up right now. We're getting massive rains in Northern California. And on the Shasta Dam, they're actually not dumping the water at a high rate. And so that makes hydroelectric power. You see coming out, it actually comes from the bottom of the dam is where the hydro plant is. Here, this is that's a different form of spilling there that comes out of the spillway when, you know, they feel like they have an excess. So hydroelectric power, if you want to play the CO2 game for a moment, is CO2-free power. So it's available for 24/7 as long as you got water behind the dam. You can generate that CO2-free power. It's reliable. You don't have to wait for the sun to come up to hit your solar panels, or the clouds to go away, the rain to go away, or the wind to come up to blow your windmill. So what's happening in Northern California? Well, recently they decided, after many years, to tear down, this is kind of related to that subject, 4 dams on the Klamath River. Now, you see some of the Klamath system here that helps transfer water to agriculture and other needs and wildlife as well. They tore them down, took down 4 dams that produce hydroelectric power. The CO2-free power everybody thinks they want. Tore them down, and guess what's happening now? Because they're getting a lot of rain in the area, we're actually getting flooding in certain areas, and we will get more flooding with the even greater amount of rain because we don't have the dams anymore as a tool, all ostensibly to help a fish population go up and down the Klamath River. Well, the flaw in that thinking is that the Klamath Lake is actually a system that is based on a very shallow, rather warm lake up here that feeds the rest of the system here that is not really the best for the salmon that they're talking about. But we gloss over that because we just want to tear the dams out and score a win. Well, they got their way, they scored them, and now the whole basin here is being affected, the river system is being affected by where there used to be water, and now you're getting sloughing, you're getting the people that live along the area, their property is now worth a lot less, all because of, I think, fraudulent environmental claims that really have never been proven. And so what's some of the other effects of watching those dams be torn out? The initial happening was dead fish, ostensibly 4 fish. When they removed those dams, there was a great concentration of silt that had built up behind them over 50, 60, 100 years, depending on the age of which of the 4 dams. And so we had this massive kill of this and a whole bunch of other wildlife up and down the river as that silt is now being pushed the 170 or so miles it is out to the ocean. So these salmon live on a 3-year cycle. So if this silt doesn't wash all the way out to the sea in that 3-year period, what does that mean long term for salmon populations? Will they die off as all the different cycles of salmon will be gone? So here's the dead fish. You had dead deer out there getting trapped in this silt. All sorts of wildlife, turtles, you name it. But in the name of the environment, putting our heads back, or pinning our ears back and just going, they tore the dams out anyway. And they have their sights on more. One called Lake Pillsbury in Mendocino County, which a lot of people rely on for drinking water as well as agricultural water. And it used to be a power generator in that area as well. But the utility decided it's not worth the fight anymore, so they've abandoned it. And if they get their way, it will be torn out soon too. So, you know, it's just one losing combination after another on this, all in the name of the environment, and another loser for the people. The tear out of the Klamath dams cost the people $450 million to remove those. $250 million of it came from a state water bond. Now, the rest of the bond is supposed to be actually building water supply, including the Sites Reservoir I can talk to you about here in a little bit. And another $200 million came from the ratepayers of Pacific Corp, where they were charged a surcharge to put money aside for the dam removal, so the company could skate out of there without any real liability on the dams they owned. So that was the honey deal that was put together for that. So when I come back to this picture of Shasta Dam here, when the water's not being run through the turbines at the bottom of the dam, or like the one at Lake Oroville, then you've missed out on an opportunity of generating low-cost, highly reliable, CO2-free power. So Shasta Dam isn't currently doing that right now, but Lake Oroville, nearby, also in my district in Northern California, is dumping water. And I understand Army Corps of Engineers has a goal of making sure there's enough storage to make up for mass amounts of rain. And indeed, we've gotten a lot of rain lately. Shasta Dam had a peak inflow of 120,000 cubic feet per second. I think it was yesterday. And Oroville, I think, peaked at about 107,000 cubic feet per second. But guess what? Both of those dams have still a mass amount of space behind them. Oroville, I think it's 400,000 more acre feet of space, maybe 450, and Shasta Dam's about still 500,000 acre feet of space. And so this storm is going to end mostly, I think, tomorrow. And at that point, those numbers, they've already tailed off from those peaks, I said, in the 100,000s. Each of them are down now about 50 to 60,000 CFS coming in. And so those numbers will continue to tail off as the rain stops. And so we'll have a situation where, yeah, we got a good influx of water that's going to help fill the lakes. As I said, they're each still far from their goal of being full. And when you recall that we went nearly 0 for January on rainfall in Northern California. We got some on the very last day, and we're going to expect that we can count on filling these lakes in February or March. April 1 is kind of the magic date where they relieve the flood control mandate on that, allow the lakes to fill up more than their action level, which those numbers are being caught up to now and maybe slightly exceeded. The thing is, they're quick to want to dump water. And yeah, they're scared of this big storm right now, but it has just kind of brought it up to par, you know. And it's going to put us in a good position to be able to get the lakes full by the time May and June rolls around. And there's nothing to say that they can't let water out a little at a time should it look like it'll get too full. But the haste, in my view, and it's my opinion, to let the water out, I think they want to bump Oroville up to 50,000. I think currently it's 33,000 of CFS going out. They want to bump it up to 50, which just isn't the greatest for people downriver at that level. They could just keep it at a steady 20 or 30 for a little while, and then when the storm ends and they see the inflow has stopped, maybe they can just take a time out and see forecasting with the weather. We can watch the news and have a pretty good read on what the weather's going to be, but the Army Corps of Engineers is still using 50-year-old manuals, from the 70s on how they want to plan the flood control aspects of the storage of these lakes. 50-year-old manuals, and they say, well, we're updating them. Like, well, when will they be updated so we can use dynamic scoring, so to speak, on how weather is going to be predicted? And, can we manage the lake in a way that, well, we don't see much weather happening in the next 2 weeks, so we don't really need to let water out in February or March or what have you. Let's let it build up. No, they're not allowing themselves to use that. They're still studying. They're still in the back room studying and working on updating the manuals. And they say, well, have it in 2 or 3 more years. Like, well, that's frustrating, man, because watch what happens when people don't get the water they need in the San Joaquin Valley to grow the amazing crops that we have in this state. I show you this poster quite a bit on these floor talks here of what California grows. It's here somewhere. Anyway, when we don't have the water to do this stuff, here we go. You don't get this stuff from California. And so when you see that over 90%, even 100% of some of these products are grown in California, are you going to import them somewhere else? At what quality? At what price? At what continuity? Or can we have them come from the state, because we actually do have the water supply in the north to supply the whole state? Some people say, well, Doug, are you going to send all, my Northern California neighbors sometimes, you're going to send all the water south? What's wrong with you? We have plenty of water if we would store it, if we would add to the Shasta Dam. We have the opportunity to raise Shasta Dam 18 feet, 600,000 more acre feet of storage, and also the ability to not have to release water quite as quickly if they get to that point. Now, you got to see the water chugging down the Sacramento River without the releases. There's a lot of water coming in, okay? We get that. But that's what these structures are for, is to take that ebb and flow, so to speak, that be that rubber band. That's what dams are good for. And that's why they're seeing flooding on the Klamath in areas, because they took the dams out, and they lost the hydroelectric power in the process. So when we're talking about how much water is getting away from us that could be generating power that could go for crops, growing crops in Northern California and Central California. Indeed, the breadbasket that I just showed you on those. Here's a more updated poster I have now of what's been happening. The water year, they score it from October 1 until the following September 30. So this is starting October of 23, the water year, up to so far a little earlier in January when we had this information. So it's about 1.25 years of flow. So what makes me crazy is that we're not taking advantage right now of the water that's flowing out of Lake Oroville, or is coming out south of Lake Shasta and flooding the delta. Right here, during this 1.25 year period that's almost current right now, we have a number of 29 million acre feet came into the delta. 29 million acre feet. Now combined, Lake Oroville, Lake Shasta hold 8 million acre feet. San Luis Reservoir holds about 2 million acre feet. Nearby you have New Melones, which is around 2 million. Trinity Lake, I think, is 2.2 million. Lake Folsom is a number, I think, 800,000 if I remember correctly. So you would fill all those lakes one time with this 1.25 years worth of flow that comes into the delta. So that's what comes in. So, okay, well, certainly we're using some of that water and moving it to other places because we're smart and we can design things. We have the engineers for that. We used to have a vision for that when we built the Central Valley Project in the 30s and the State Water Project in the 60s. Well, their vision did put away a lot of water, and they had a vision for even more, but they quit building it because the population didn't really demand it at the time, back in the 30s or the 60s or whatever. Should have built it, because you can't build it now because of all the environmental nonsense. But how much did we save? 29 million in, 22 million went out to the Pacific Ocean and turned into salt water. Some people say, like, well, we should build some desal plants along the coast. Yeah, we could do that. Certain areas that might be strategically smart. Guess what happened? A project called Poseidon, I think in the Huntington Beach, one of the beach towns in Southern California, they fought for 20 years trying to meet every mandate, every hoop to jump through on what it would take to get a permit from the California Coastal Commission and others on that. They spent millions of dollars to build that desal plant down there. As I said, they jumped through every hoop and answered every question. And we're told after 20 years, no, we're not going to permit you. So there you go on your desal. So where do you want the water to come from for anybody, for any purpose? Well, it could come from right here, this 22 million we're wasting. So what's happening right now? The mass inflows coming down Sacramento River and Feather River and all these other areas. And I'd like to see what the Delta inflows are today. They're probably pretty amazing. There's two sets of pumps at the south end of the Delta, a federal set and a state set. President Trump has seen to it through the Bureau of Reclamation that the federal pumps are running pretty strong, somewhere around 90–91% of capacity. State pumps are running at a much lower level, somewhere around 20–25%. It oscillates between that. Why aren't they running at 100% and taking advantage of the opportunity to fill San Luis Reservoir, which is only 3/4 full right now, or put water in the aqueduct, or put even more into the areas that water could be pooling in the Central Valley and doing groundwater recharge? I was just told today we've seen some groundwater recharge last year due to some of those positive efforts. And that's a tough deal for those folks down there because they've had overdrafts, due to agriculture, due to having their surface water taken away from them in these projects because it's going out to the ocean for a fish deal. So they had to run their wells. Maybe they ran them too much. So you've had subsidence where the land goes down. It depresses somewhat. You even see that in the canals going through there. So we can be doing recharge right now, and the governor has moved in the direction of allowing more recharge. For some reason they have to get a permit for that every year. I talked to his team about that, said, why don't we just have the permits ready to go every year, and so we don't have to wait and lose time on that. So maybe that'll be a precedent going forward. So groundwater recharge, filling the aqueducts and the Southern California reservoirs that aren't full. For example, this one, which was empty when the fire broke out in Pacific Palisades, is the San Ynez Reservoir. My understanding of it is that, done correctly, the aqueducts could supply some of the higher lakes, I think Lake Cachuma, and someone can straighten me out if I'm wrong on this, but through the domino effect, surface water, I believe, could make it here. I know they do fill this with well waters also, but the lake was empty because they had to fix a cover over it. They emptied it last February and haven't gotten around to doing the repair or finished the job. So it sat empty, 117 million gallons of water, which is about 40 acre-feet, which would have helped keep the hydrants full instead of just a few hours, as they're relying on 3 1-million-gallon tanks instead of 117 million. It lasted a few hours down there as they were valiantly trying to fight fire in Palisades and other areas. They could have had several days' worth of water had that been full. So was it bad planning? I don't know. Bureaucracy. And the crazy thing was that the LA Fire Department didn't even know, they didn't have the knowledge that it was empty. So instead, burned out community. Because they didn't have everything they needed to be able to fight that fire the way they could. Could they have beat it all? I'm not sure. They had a lot of wind to beat. And the firefighters fought valiantly and people did a lot they could, but certainly having that extra water supply could not have hurt. I know I've seen plenty of that in my own Northern California area with communities just disappearing due to fire. And this falls more to forest management, land management. Down in Southern California, they had a brush removal program in the areas adjacent and above those communities that burned that they suspended. The brush is the fuel that allowed the fire, driven by high wind, to come all the way to the edge of town and burn through the town. The brush removal, maybe it wouldn't be the be-all, end-all on that, but it sure would have helped. It sure would have given them more of a fighting chance. And that's what it is. We're doing forest management, especially focusing around our cities, to thin the trees and such to a point where that a fire coming high speed from a distance hit that because the trees are thin enough and spread out enough that it hits the ground and slows down, and you have a chance to save whatever town it is. We lost the town of Paradise. Partly because of that, we've lost a town called Greenville in Plumas County, another one next door called Canyon Dam. Above my hometown of Oroville, California, lost a town, Berry Creek, other adjacent areas there due to fire after fire after fire because of lack of management. The one above Oroville, near Berry Creek, they had funding lined up to do some forest thinning around there, a grant the local folks were going to do. And because there was an 18-month or longer process to get the permits to do something. This is not something new either. This isn't new under the sun of thinning forests and managing them. But they didn't get it done, so those areas burned. They burned out, these towns. Talk to the cattle rancher there, what that looked like for him. A family had been farming or ranching and grazing up in those forested areas for many, many generations and decades. Look it up on the internet. Read his column. A man named David Daly, D-A-L-E-Y. Look at his column. Look at the emotion. Look at what it meant to him on that. He wrote a really good column on that 2-3 years ago on what that means. You want to talk about a real human story on that and a real thing that affects a community and all that, I'd ask you to look that up. David Daly. Go search that and find his column and see what lack of forest management meant to him and the burned out, the carcasses of the cattle that he and his family are run there, as well as all the other wildlife, the cougars, the raccoons, you name it. This happens to everybody. And then the next effect of that after the fire is that when the rain does come, it's going to wash all this ash, wash all this mud down into the brooks and the creeks and the rivers and the streams and eventually into, in this area, Lake Oroville, which is being a key part of the state water project, supplies water to 20 million Californians. So it isn't just, hey, you guys way up there in the sticks, you don't matter, you know, whatever. No, that has an effect on pretty much the whole state that draws that water supply because we aren't doing a simple thing like something that's not new under the sun of managing forests properly. Well, they're going to clear cut everything. Yeah, that's what they want to do. Big timber, big lumber companies want to. No, it isn't. It's nonsense. Pay attention. Dig in on this. These folks that do it on their private land, they have an 80, 100-year plan of how they harvest, manage, and plant it back. And that's what we need to have similarly on federal lands or your other government-owned lands, which I'm reminded they aren't government-owned, they're people-owned. The government's supposed to be the steward of them. And it's not being a steward. You know, Forest Service, they're way behind the 8 ball. They have 193 million acres under their purview, and if they're managing 2 million of that per year, that's only 1%, which means it'll take 100 years to get over all of it. So hopefully they're accelerating the process. That's what we're trying to cause them to do here. But when they count burned out land sometimes as treated acres, like, well, you can just burn everything, I guess, and have it check the box to say it's treated. That's nonsense. That's terrible for everybody. The asset that timber is, which doesn't always get accounted for its value. They'll talk about what the cost of the firefighting was or the cost of the buildings and towns that are burned out. Do we ever get to see what the value is of the actual timber itself? So what we have isn't working. It's not all that successful with the management of these forested lands, the management of the water supply, and the ability we have to do so much better, and it doesn't cause environmental harm. We have excess water for much of the year going out the Delta and other areas that could be captured and put to good people use. People still need the food, and they still need these products. We can grow them in California, or we can try and import them from South America or somewhere else and become dependent on a foreign food supply. That's a really great idea. And then we don't have the employment of our people. We don't have employment of the lumberjacks in small towns I represent in Northern California or others like it in other states. So you have that unemployment, you have boarded up small communities, you have all the things that go with the social aspect of people that don't have the self-worth that comes from good, honest work. What's that get into? You know what that gets into. It ends up being alcoholism, drug abuse, domestic violence, all those things that would be restored with a strong local economy, giving products that people need anyway. They need wood and paper products. They need food products. They need electricity to be generated, whether it's by a hydroelectric power plant or any other manner of energy that can do it. Uranium, why aren't we doing much more with nuclear power? CO2 free for our CO2 scorers out there. Why aren't we doing that? I don't know. Environmentalists sue and stop over everything. We've got a reformed Endangered Species Act NEPA and the California state level CEQA to work for us once again. These are laws that the federal level passed 50 years ago or longer. And they've been manipulated. They've been weaponized by courts, by judges, by environmental groups to turn into something else. Even something as nice as a national park. I like to point out the folks in Marin County, these farmers and ranchers there on an area called the Point Reyes Seashore Park. Those folks came in the early 60s and demanded they were going to bully these people off their land by eminent domain. So they struck a deal. Said, well, we'll sell the land to the national parks as long as we have the ability to lease it back in perpetuity was the deal that was struck. As long as it's the same family that is in the operation there, it was supposed to be in perpetuity. So they struck that deal, and they thought they could live with that. Well, not too many years later after the weaponization of environmental laws and what's known as NEPA, a permit process, that got weaponized by environmental groups to sue the heck out of these people every time they tried to get an extension of their grazing permit. You know, they were trying to get them for 20 years, and they'd say, well, we'll have to settle for 5 or 2. And so for doing some of the environmental mitigation that they would be demanded of, with only a 2-year lease, it's pretty tough to say, like, well, I can't put, $500,000 into my sheds or my equipment or the drainage to control whatever might be coming off the dairy or the ranch. So they can't make the investment because they can't be assured that they'll be long enough there to do that. So basically, they're screwed by government and by environmental organizations. And these are good, honorable people. They're very compatible with the land. They say, well, it's the Thule elk are being affected by these cattle. The elk and the cattle get along beautifully together. There's many acres for them. They graze to a level that the land can sustain, and then they move them out. They move them to a different grazing area. Grazing is a good thing, whether we're talking forested areas or others as fire breaks, or in this case, the Point Reyes seashore, where these families have been disrespected and basically a gun held to their head to sign an agreement only recently to say, you're going to have to leave the land. These are good, hardworking people. And there doesn't seem to be much reward in California and some aspects of the federal government for being good, hardworking people, honest people, the ones that'll pull over on the edge of the road and help you with your flat tire or make sure you're okay, like that, What do they get? Litigated to death. People, some of them very elderly now, just say, I just can't fight the fight anymore. I don't have enough money. I don't have enough will. So what happens? Government wins, extreme environmental organizations win, and somebody comes in and says, save the day, hey, we're going to buy you out there. You'll get 15 months to be eased out of this. So all the employees are gone, the cattle's gone, the dairies are going to go somewhere else. It's hard enough to run a dairy in California anymore. They regulate that out of business. Well, there's people that don't like dairy products. They don't like that. They don't like that it comes from animals. A lot of wrong people are in charge. And it's been pretty refreshing to see what the Trump administration has done to put things back on a direction here that rewards hard work, honesty, and the right way of doing things. So it can be kind of discouraging, very discouraging. And for the families, the farmers, the ranchers in this Point Reyes situation right now, my heart goes out to them. I hope we can find a solution for them because they shouldn't be getting kicked off that land. They, in good faith, when they were bullied off that land and had to sell to the parks, otherwise lose it to eminent domain, had now been bullied off by regulations, by NEPA, by endless lawsuits. That ain't right. That ain't America. They're still making a product that people want and people need. They would like to continue doing that as good stewards of the land. Instead, they have designs like, well, we're going to have more tourism on there. Like, well, is that as good? I would suggest it probably isn't as good for that land. But, they power ahead. So I hope maybe something can be done to rectify that and rectify a whole lot of other things that have affected rural America so much so. Mr. Speaker, thank you. I yield back.
The gentleman's time is expired. Under the Speaker's announced policy of January